Solent Etchells sailors were looking forward to 2 days of good racing this weekend, but the weather gods had other ideas. Hot sunshine pleased those ashore, but windless conditions on Saturday morning meant that there was little hope of getting in the 3 scheduled races on the first day of this World Championship qualifying weekend. With no wind across the central Solent, the Royal Corinthians race team, led by Bob Milner, kept the fleet ashore and prayed for wind. The prayers were not answered, and eventually racing was abandoned for the day. Sunday dawned with the same windless conditions, but Bob Milner was determined to get some races in, and at 11 o'clock decided to take the fleet to sea and wait for a saleable breeze. The fleet anchored on the brambles and waited for wind. Sure enough, Bob's prayers were answered, and by early afternoon a light south-southwesterly breeze allowed racing to get underway. The first attempt at a start proved how eager the fleet was to go racing. A general recall was the inevitable result, and the following start would be under a Z flag to enforce good behaviour. The Z flag had the desired effect, and this time the fleet got away clean. Most of the fleet favoured the left side of the beat, and with just 0.6 of a mile to the windward mark, it didn't take long to get to the ley line. In fact, boats that had bailed outright after a poor start did well on that side of the course. At the windward mark, it was Niels Razmilovic in Matter 2 who had a comfortable lead. Some way behind Matter 2 came Andy Beedsworth in Dawn Raid, ahead of Chris Torrens in Best Mate, one of those who'd benefited from heading right on the beat. Razmilovic extended his lead down the run, and Matter 2 rounded the leeward mark with a healthy lead. Behind Matter 2, Lawrence Mead in Freelance had moved up to second, ahead of Andy Beedsworth, with Ante Razmilovic in Swedish Blue in third. Chris Torrens had dropped back to fifth. Back up to the windward mark, and Niels Razmilovic was in a race on his own. Behind Matter 2, it was a 3-way fight for second, with Lawrence Mead just holding off Andy Beedsworth and Ante Razmilovic. Back at the leeward mark, Niels Razmilovic was away and clear on the final short beat to the finish, and Lawrence Mead had broken away from the boats behind. But they may want to look closely at this mark rounding. Behind Mead, Andy Beedsworth had opened up a bit of a gap ahead of Ante Razmilovic, who rounded just ahead of Graham Bailey in Arbitrator and Graham Sunderland in Elvis. All 6 leaders held their places to the finish. As soon as all 23 races had finished, the race committee swung straight into another start. The fleet favoured the pin end, but many were line shy. With the right of the beat favoured, most boats tacked to port as soon as possible. These two, Gellert and Woebegong, were first to head right and sail to the ley line. They ended up 3rd and 6th respectively. At the windward mark, it was the familiar sight of Niels Razmilovic with a clear lead. He was followed by his brother Ante, and a tight bunch of boats all hunting qualification points for June's World Championship, which has been staged on these same waters. Down the run, and boats spread across the course, but at the bottom mark it was still Razmilovic with a 27-second lead from Andy Beedsworth, who had relegated Ante Razmilovic to 3rd place. At the windward mark for the second time, Razmilovic still led, but Beedsworth had closed the gap on the leader and opened up a big one on the boats behind. Next round was a 3-boat battle between Tim Dorton's Mayhem, Ante Razmilovic and Andy Oddy. Down the run, the battle between the leaders continued, with Beedsworth closing right up on Razmilovic. Both boats had to execute perfect jibe drops at the leeward mark before a short beat to the finish, with Razmilovic holding on to claim his 2nd win in a row. In third place came Galert, ahead of Swedish Blue and Mayhem, with Wobergong taking sixth. The 23-boat fleet spread fairly evenly along the line for the start of the third and final race of the day. A lot of boats headed left, but the ones to the right were gaining. The wind had increased to a nice force 3 by now, and the sailors were enjoying wind, flat sea and sunshine. At the windward mark it was Razmilovich in the lead, only this time it was Ante, not Niels. Behind Ante came Graham Bailey in second and Andy Beadsworth in third. Behind them the fleet poured around the windward mark. At the leeward mark it was Ante's turn to show that he too could sail away to a large lead. Graham Bailey rounded second, ahead of Niels Razmilovich and Andy Beadsworth. Behind them was a great melee as half a fleet arrived at the mark together. At the final windward mark, Ante Razmilovich's Swedish Blue had a commanding lead ahead of Andy Beadsworth. Graham Bailey in Arbitrator was in third, ahead of Richard Merriweather's Take Two. This group went on to finish in the same positions, while Niels Razmilovich pulled up from seventh at the final windward mark to finish fifth, and to end up the day leading on points ahead of Andy Beadsworth and his brother Ante. The final races for this World Championship qualifying series, in which only the top 40% of the Cowes fleet will qualify, will be staged in 2 weeks' time, when there is sure to be some nail-biting action. See you then.